from College Green. Good morning to you, James.
Hi, good morning.
Lovely to have you join.
I'm not on the phone to someone else. There's a problem with the microphone.
No, exactly. He's not calling his mum at the same time. We've just been getting you. You're being very patient with our tech problems there. So we can see you and we can hear you thanks to the two technologies melded together. Thank you very much. But do give our best to your mum when you speak. There's lots I want to talk to you about, including I know you're making an announcement today, but I want to ask you about these protests though, and these new powers to stop disruption to major sporting cultural events. Public Order Act, some of those measures brought in today ahead of the coronation. And where do you draw the line between legal and illegal protests, particularly when it comes to either anti-monarchy protesters, but for a lot of people it's the eco-protesters that they've really had enough of?
Look, I think we've had concerns over, a number of months about the government's approach to public order because, I think whilst it's really important to maintain public order, we've thought throughout a lot of the measures the government have been proposing that they've cast the net too wide, they've set the threshold too low, and they've risked making an offence out of what should be legal, legitimate protest. So, there is a balance to be struck when deciding on how laws like this are created. But when we've been discussing in Parliament over the last several months, we think that they've got the balance wrong.
When you say the balance wrong, what would you do then? What would Labour do? Because again, a lot of people, for instance, with the eco-protesters, I mean, frankly, people's lives are being wrecked by that. They can't get to work, they can't be able to get to hospital. People have really had enough of these protesters.
Well, look, I think, it is an ambulance trying to get to an emergency, that should not be blocked. It's wrong when ambulances are blocked from getting to help people who are in an emergency. That's clearly one side of the line. But I think the problem with the way the government's been approaching public order in general is that where they've drawn the line has set the threshold too low and risk criminalising or making an offence out of actions where people are not creating that kind of disruption. And so it impacts on legal protest. So, this is a question of drawing the line and having a balance in society between making sure that, ambulances can get to emergencies unimpeded, but whilst also making sure that our, centuries-old right to protest is protected.
Okay.
And we think the government have been getting it wrong.
Well, talking about Just Stop Oil, interesting oil in the news, your announcement today is you're revealing what you call the staggering cost of the new Windfall tax break for oil and gas giants from Rishi Sunak's government, saying £11 billion has been handed out to firms making record profits. We just had BP's record results for a quarter, £4 billion yesterday. Talk us through this announcement.
So, look, what we've been saying is that the cost of living crisis is the number one issue facing people across the country. That's what I think will be at the front of people's minds going into the elections tomorrow. And what we're seeing the government doing at the moment is pushing through a council tax rise on people across the country, at the same time as oil and gas giants are making record windfall profits because of the price of oil and gas. And so what we're saying is that we would strengthen the windfall tax, the windfall tax that we first called for in January last year, and which the government has inched towards kicking and screaming, but having left massive loopholes in it. What we're saying is close those loopholes, strengthen the windfall tax, get some of that money which is on the table from the oil and gas giants' windfall profits, and use that money to help people through the cost of living crisis. That's the kind of...
A lot of people will be cheering Labour on about that, but I mean, and it is the case that actually these massive windfall tax actually very rarely paid because there are all these loopholes for if you're reinvesting, if you're searching for new oil and gas or doing other measures that you can actually you can write that off. The reality is though, we've already got some of those big oil giants saying, well, we're just going to go and do our work somewhere else. Plenty of other places to go and get gas and oil, and if you tax us too highly, and they're already taxed, got super duper taxes well over the sort of tax rates that any other company in this country pays for when they're dealing with North Sea oil and gas, they'll just go elsewhere, and then we won't have either the oil and gas for ourselves and to export, and we won't be getting the taxes on their profits either. So won't we just be in a situation where we're kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face just to make a nice point in a government manifesto, well, wanting to be government manifesto?
Well, look, we have to recognise that the profits which oil and gas giants are making at the moment were not expected. And this is not due to, ingenuity or innovation or anything on behalf of the oil and gas giants.
They made massive losses in 2020.
No, but look, the profits that they're making at the moment, are way beyond anything they could have expected a few years ago. And it's because of the war in Ukraine. These are the windfalls of war. And what we're saying is it is fair when there are windfall profits in that sense to have a windfall tax, particularly at a time when you have a cost of living crisis impacting people across the country. And this comes down to political choices. And the choice that the Conservatives are making in government is not to strengthen the windfall tax, but instead to push up council tax on people across the country. We would take a different choice.
We do not have time to get into this now, but suffice to say, I can't leave this without pointing out that Labour policy on not having any new licences for oil and gas in the North Sea will actually mean that energy prices will go even higher. So, I mean, you're creating the problem to make it even worse. Let's talk about the NHS strikes. It did look like yesterday that this pay deal voted for by NHS unions and the NHS Staff Council will be going through. 5% pay rise for this financial year and a one-off lump sum varying amounts for last year. Most of the unions have voted for this. We've still got some other units going ahead with strikes, and RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, looking to go ahead with a nationwide ballot to see if their members are going to agree to this. Unite, RCN, the leading union, saying we're not happy. Do you think that we may be getting to the end of NHS strikes? In which case, is this a victory for the government?
Well, look, I think the government have been dragging their feet over engaging with health unions about the disputes for NHS staff pay over months and months and months. This dispute has been dragging on for so long, and it's caused so much disruption already in terms of strikes that have gone ahead. We've been saying for months and months and months now that the government should have got around the table, negotiated with health unions earlier to avoid all of the impact of the strikes which have happened already have had. The government have come around to having some conversations at the 11th hour. They still haven't really learned fully the lessons, but this is a mess of Rishi Sunak's making. And frankly, you can see quite how angry so many nurses and other NHS staff are at the way that they've been treated.
OK, can I ask you also about Sue Gray? She has apparently given evidence to the ACOBA, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, about when she started talking to Keir Starmer about working with your boss in his office ahead of the general election and after it if he becomes Prime Minister. But at the time, it's believed she was actually working on the Partygate report, the investigation into the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. She's refused to cooperate with the Cabinet Office, though the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, has said in a statement yesterday. Is it appropriate for anyone working in the civil service, supposedly politically neutral, to be investigating a current Prime Minister in a case of something which was part of the downfall of that Prime Minister, to at the same time be holding secret talks with the Leader of the Opposition?
Well, look, I think Keir Starmer made very clear when he was on media yesterday that he had no discussions with Sue Gray during the investigation into Boris Johnson. So let's be clear to separate out facts here from what Conservative ministers have been trying to feed into the media over the last few days. I think it's really important to focus on the facts here and to focus on the fact that Sue Gray has been cooperating fully with the ACOBA process, which is the right process, which is the right body to look into the situation around her appointment and around her future job. That's the right thing to do, not to be distracted by this kind of made-up political process that the Conservatives have invented.
We'll have to leave it there. James Murray, appreciate you joining us. He's Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Appreciate you persevering with that phone. We're going to be taking a quick break. Next up,